And CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now to discuss more on the debt ceiling. Weijia, great to see you. So is the White House satisfied with this tentative agreement? We heard President Biden speak a little earlier today, and we heard you ask some questions of him.
Matt, it's great to be with you. And I would say, yes, they have to be satisfied with this agreement since they brokered it. But of course, they're not channeling that exact message because they are very well aware of the pushback, especially from some progressive members of their caucus. And so they are trying to explain why this is in fact a good deal, why the Democrats did in fact get something and not nothing other than raising the debt ceiling. So the president himself expressed optimism just a short time ago, as you mentioned, as he left the White House here. And, you know, he says he's continuing outreach. He's calling members up himself, having tough conversations about, you know, why they need to pass this bill.
Yeah, so some Democrats in the progressive wing of the party seem to not be so happy about it. Again, people on the president's side when it comes to politics. So what are they concerned about?
Well, they are on his side, and that's exactly what they're pointing out, that when they supported him, he agreed not to roll back some of these programs that are now on the table, especially when it comes to programs like the SNAP program, formerly known as the food stamp program that assists people who need help there. They have a lot of concerns, not only about new work requirements for that program, but also for pieces of their climate agenda, feeling like there's not enough protection there, as well as the rescinded COVID relief funds, about $30 billion that have already been approved but now allocated will now go back to the budget. And there is concern there because, of course, those COVID relief funds were not only to address the emergency portion of the pandemic, which is now over, but to help many struggling Americans who found themselves in a tough spot because of the pandemic. So I think the president and several White House staffers have some tough questions ahead and some explaining to do about why, you know, they came to the agreement that they did.
Well, speaking of tough questions, as I mentioned, you asked President Biden earlier about that pushback from progressives. So let's listen to what he had to say to you.
Have you talked to Congresswoman Jayapal, and do you think you can get progressives on board?
The answer is I don't know. I have a good relationship with Jayapal. I haven't had a chance to speak to her yet.
So, Weijia, what plans does the White House have in order to get those Democrats, however many there are, on board with this plan?
So just to be clear, Congresswoman Jayapal is the leader of the Progressive Caucus. This is the group that is resisting so far. They haven't outright said that they're not going to vote for the deal, but they certainly are expressing their concerns about it every chance they get. And you heard just there that President Biden said he has yet to speak with her after the deal came to fruition. And he was very blunt in saying he wasn't sure. He said, I don't know, when I asked if he thought he could get progressives on board. But there is a ton of outreach, Matt, not only from the president himself, but from real heavy hitters here at the White House to try to convince Democrats to vote for this bill. We're talking about Chief of Staff Jeff Zients, of course, the three negotiators that put this bill together, including the Budget Director Shalanda Young, John Podesta, who is in charge of all things climate here on the agenda. So they are making one-on-one phone calls to members. In fact, more than 60 in recent days, and that number has just continued to go up with each passing hour. They're also holding specific briefings for Democrats. Today there were briefings, tomorrow there are more briefings to answer any questions that they have about the inner workings of this deal, because again, at the end of the day, even though they have an agreement, if they don't have the votes, it doesn't matter. So this entire week is going to probably be devoted to really making that push because the X date, the deadline for when the U.S. Could default, as the Treasury Secretary said, is now June 5th. That is very close.
It is 1 week from today. All right, Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Greetings, everybody. This is Drink Your OJ on May 30, 2023. With another juice report. And that's right, you heard correct. The debt ceiling agreement, as it's being called, has been reached. It is being called an agreement because that's all it is right now. As per usual with the Biden administration, they have done a bunch of things to appease moderates and centrists and Republicans, and very, very little in the way of appeasing progressives, because in the so-called big tent of the Democratic Party, progressives are kind of the redheaded, stepchild that doesn't get a whole lot of respect. And I don't know why that is, because this country, I would argue, according to polling, is progressive. But we will leave that debate for another day. For today, let's just go briefly into the details of what this debt limit agreement contains, what it doesn't contain, what progressives and others are going to be pissed and or happy about. We got a little bit of that from the CBS News clip that we just watched. Let's get some more details here from a few articles. And the first thing I've got pulled up here is the actual text of the bill. You'll notice it's scrolled to the very beginning of the bill. I am not going to read 99 pages of dense legal text at this time of night. For anybody that wants to do so, I commend you. I will probably take a peek at some of it later. Right now is not that time. But the link, because I've included it in the video, I will have the link in the description. So, moving on. What's in and what's out of the debt ceiling between Biden and McCarthy? The debt ceiling deal between Biden and McCarthy. Yeah, it seems like the debt ceiling itself is just a concept that Biden and McCarthy kind of came up with themselves, but it wasn't actually them. They have just been continuing a long-beloved Washington tradition. Negotiators are now racing to finalize the bill's text. McCarthy said the House will vote on the legislation on Wednesday, giving the Senate time to consider it before June 5th, the date when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said the United States could default on its debt obligations if lawmakers did not act in time. While many details about the deal are yet unknown, both sides will be able to point to some victories. So what do we have? There's a 2-year debt increase and some spending limits. The agreement would keep non-defense spending roughly flat in the 2024 fiscal year and increase it by 1% the following year, as well as provide for a 2-year debt limit increase past the next presidential election in 2024. So basically kicking the can down the road in exchange for not raising spending a whole lot, except of course for defense spending, always getting a cutout for defense spending. Because what kind of arms dealer would the United States be if we couldn't raise our budget for arms year after year? They included for a fund dedicated to veterans who have been exposed to toxic substances or environmental hazards. So that's good. It says Biden sought $20.3 billion for the Toxic Exposure Fund in his budget. It doesn't say here if that specific amount was met. Work requirements. Now this is not going to be a good one. The agreement would expand some work requirements for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. The agreement would raise the age for existing work requirements from 49 to 54, similar to the Republican proposal, but those changes would expire in 2030. That doesn't seem good. Personally, I think SNAP is one of those kinds of things that, if somebody says, I need food, we should just go ahead and give it to them. And then on the backs of their tax filing the next year, basically, if it turns out that they made enough money that they didn't need government-assisted food, then we just tax that back from them so that they didn't actually get any, quote-unquote free food. Heaven forbid we give away anything like that. But that would prevent people from, in the meantime, starving while they're waiting to be approved for whether they deserve food or not, I just think that's a ridiculous standard, and when we know that the government is not as quick to respond to things as it needs to be because it's been underfunded in so many ways for so long, it's better to get in front of the problem and just deal with minor things like cost after the fact. But that's my progressive bleeding heart getting in the way of being a true American libertarian bastard. So I guess let's get cold-hearted and look at the rest of this plan here. Speeding up energy projects. This deal puts in place changes to the National Environmental Policy Act that would designate a single lead agency to develop environmental reviews in hope of streamlining the process. That sounds bad in a lot of ways, but it also seems like it could be good. It really depends on what kind of things you are streamlining, what kind of environmental reviews it is that are getting approved. So I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. What was left out? Republicans had sought to repeal Biden's efforts to waive $10,000 to $20,000 in debt for nearly all borrowers who took out student loans. But the provision was a non-starter for Democrats. The budget agreement would keep Biden's student loan relief in place, though the Supreme Court will have the ultimate say on the matter. The Supreme Court is dominated 6-3 by conservatives, and those justices' questions in oral arguments showed skepticism about the legality of Biden's student loans plan. A decision is expected before the end of June. And if you're one of those people hopeful that Biden's plan is going to survive the Supreme Court, well, you have more hope than I do. But at least it hasn't been scrapped yet. For basically the same story, but from the other side of the pond, as it were, here's an article from BBC News about what's in the U.S. debt ceiling deal. Let's make this, I think I can make this bigger, right? Yeah, there we go. Negotiators from Democratic and Republican parties finalized an agreement on Sunday night. If approved, it would allow the federal government to borrow money until well after the next presidential election, due in November 2024. I like the way that they explain how things kind of work in the United States, because it is exactly as insane as it sounds. We vote to spend money on things, and then later, after we've spent the money, we vote whether to actually pay the bill for the thing that we've spent the money on. That's essentially how our budget process works. That's what the debt ceiling is. The debt ceiling is not the budget. The budget happened years ago. This is paying for debt that we already had in a past budget that was already approved, that Congress already said spend the money this way. And then now they're trying to go back and claw back and retroactively change things, because the way our budget process works is unlike literally any other country in the fucking world. No other country does it this stupid, because it doesn't make any fucking sense. If you agree that you're going to buy something, you agree that you're going to pay for that thing. As a nation, you do not operate as, maybe we're going to steal this thing and just not pay our bill. I don't know. As a leading superpower in the world, you can't operate an economy on maybe we're going to pay our bills, maybe we're not. It's just fucking insane, because what it allows for is exactly what's happened in this country for the past decades, which is hostage taking. That the party, most generally not completely in power, but with enough power because of our backwards ass minoritarian power structure, that they can go ahead and just fuck up the entire process of our government paying its debts and basically hold the world economy hostage. Because if the US government were to default on its debts, that would obviously throw the entire global economy into a complete fuck. That would blow everything up, which is why it's a joke to even negotiate in the first place, because obviously none of these lawmakers are going to let that happen, because obviously they all have money invested in this global economy too. They don't want the thing to crash. That would hurt them probably worse than it would hurt most of us. They're the people least inclined to actually let this thing happen. But they're the most inclined to pretend to let it happen, because theater is really what all of our politics is all about. And so they know that if they can just wait till the very last minute, then that keeps everybody on the edge of their seat, and that keeps a manufactured crisis alive, and that allows them to keep using it. And that's why we just need to say, fuck this, it's stupid. We have a constitutional amendment that says this can't happen. And by the way, we're just going to print money that says we're never going to have this problem. And that's the law. And now this is clearly something that the president is getting behind. This is something that Congress is getting behind. If you just say we're going to get rid of this whole debt ceiling concept, then we solve this problem for good. But they never ever do that, and they haven't done that yet again. I'm sorry, I lost my place in the article here. I got a little sidetracked, but basically what I was getting at was debt ceiling suspended until 2025. Every so often, U.S. Congress must vote to raise or suspend the ceiling so it can borrow more to pay its bills. Currently, it is $31.4 trillion. This includes paying for federal employees, the military, Social Security, and Medicare, as well as interest on the national debt and tax refunds. But in recent years, this has become increasingly difficult because the two sides cannot agree on the terms. In the deal reached on Sunday, they have not raised the limit to a certain level, but suspended it entirely until 2025. This allows them to pay their bills until that date and know that the next fight over raising the ceiling would not interfere with the presidential election. And the rest of the world can breathe a sigh of relief that if the deal is signed, because a U.S. default would have a global impact. I think I read that wrong because I'm a little bit flustered, but you basically get the point. They're saying, if the deal does get signed, it would prevent the U.S. from completely fucking the world economy because of our stupid finance payment system. There are caps on spending, but of course not on defense. Republicans wanted a freeze on overall spending for 10 years with a rise in defense spending and cuts to other budgets. The agreement keeps non-defense spending flat next year with a 1% rise in 2025. The implications of this belt tightening is as yet unclear. Defense spending would increase to $886 billion, which amounts to a 3% rise on this year. So again, 3% more from this year already, which is already a record for defense spending. But we've got to stay the number one arms dealer in the world, guys. We cannot let that slip. If we were to do that, then Congress people would start losing their donors, and God forbid that we let that happen. I'm joking, of course. Fuck the donors and fuck everybody in Congress. But, we're not going to get that money out of politics anytime soon, so defense spending it is. The White House estimates government spending would be reduced by at least $1 trillion, says AP News, but official calculations have not been released. Now, the thing about when you cut government spending is it necessarily means a reduction in services for citizens. They're not going to cut defense spending, they just said that. So that means that the budget cuts come from other things, which means services that people are supposed to benefit from. So that's fucking terrible. The analysis says both sides can claim victory here. The White House says these cuts are not significant. The defense spending rise is what President Biden wanted, but it's below the rate of inflation and doesn't meet the demands of the more hawkish Republicans. So basically they're saying that because the Republicans didn't get everything they wanted, that's kind of good for Biden. I would argue it's completely a failure for Biden, because the fact that we're not going to raise spending, and in fact we're going to cut it for sure, while raising defense spending, means all the fucking thirsty ass donor class of elected assholes gets all the backroom deals that they want, and meanwhile the American people who actually need services from the government, which require it to spend money, get shut out. So that doesn't sound like a good deal to me. Unspent COVID funds are being returned, with the public health emergency officially ended in May, because yeah, COVID is over. Republicans had argued for the relief funds that were not spent to be returned. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated this will amount to about $30 billion. This is a win for Republicans. Many Democrats were concerned public health initiatives would be impacted by this, but it was an easier thing for President Biden to give up than other Republican priorities like Medicaid work requirements. So in other words, Biden failed again to get anything that he actually wanted. It was easier to give this up than other things. Now, the reason this is a problem, even though, COVID is, of course, over, we haven't heard about anybody ever getting COVID or dying from COVID for years now. I'm joking, of course. If you're going to go ahead and say COVID is over and it's okay for all the unspent money to be returned, you have to recognize the fact that not all of that money was meant for direct emergency COVID funding. A lot of it went to longer-term projects that were to benefit working class people that were impacted by COVID, or in a lot of situations, they were going to go to building treatment centers for substance abuse. And that money now being clawed back means those projects that got started but not finished are now never going to be finished. That money is being returned, and the projects that didn't get finished, sorry, fuck you. So if you were in the middle of building a treatment center with some of that COVID money, if you were in the middle of building any kind of healthcare thing, anything, if you had plans for that money and you haven't already spent it, sorry, clock's up. We didn't inform you that there was a clock on it, but now we're taking it back if you haven't spent it. So that's a huge loss in my book. Good job, Republicans, on clawing that money back. $30 billion, which in the overall scheme of defense spending being almost $900 billion a year is a fucking joke that we even need to, quote, claw back $30 billion. But, let's not get me started on how badly we need to roll back the military-industrial complex in this country. Welfare tinkered with, but no overhaul. The welfare being looked at by Republicans included Medicaid, health coverage for poor Americans, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, SNAP, and Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF. Medicaid remains untouched in the deal, but the age at which work requirements are included for those on SNAP was raised from 50 to 54. The White House will be happy it gained exceptions for the food stamp requirements for veterans and people who are homeless, but stricter work requirements overall are a win for Republicans. It will be a hard sell for progressive Democratic lawmakers. No shit. Funds to enforce tax rules on wealthy Americans. A win for the Democrats was securing $80 billion for a decade to help the Internal Revenue Service. Feels like they're international sometimes. To enforce the tax code in last year's Inflation Reduction Act on the richest. That is good because every dollar spent on the IRS brings back something like $8. So cutting $10 billion from the IRS actually loses you $70 billion in terms of revenue, because the IRS, when you spend money on the enforcement arm of the tax collection system, turns out raises money in taxes. Analysis says the Republicans wanted to dump the $80 billion in IRS funding, claiming it would be used to hire an army of agents to audit Americans. The agency said it would also be used to modernize the system. Instead, in showcasing his deal-making skills, President Biden agreed to cut $20 billion but divert that cash to other non-defense spending. So basically, he did agree to cut $20 billion, but said that cash would be spent elsewhere. I don't know what exactly that means because I don't know where it's being spent instead. I don't know how you can't make the argument that, hey, if we cut $20 billion, we actually lose $140 billion because that's $160 billion that isn't coming in. So your $20 billion savings is fucking dumb and you should shove it up your ass is really the better deal-making skill that President Biden should have exercised. But I'm not the president, so what do I know? I'm also not 100 fucking years old. Easier to get energy project permits. New rules will make it easier for both fossil fuel and renewable energy projects to get licenses. Oh, that's good. So we made sure to include fossil fuels in this. Good. This has long been advocated by Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. I bet it has. It will basically streamline the environmental review process and potentially get projects off the ground in a faster time. This is a win and a loss for the White House. Both parties agree that it takes far too long for new energy infrastructure to be built, but disagree on what projects should be prioritized. What a surprise. Republicans want more gas pipelines and fossil fuel projects. Democrats want more clean energy. This could be another red line for progressive Democrats. Well, no shit, especially if you haven't defined in the deal what exactly this means in terms of regulatory red tape cutting. I think there's more red tape on fossil fuels getting off the ground than there are green energy initiatives. And I think that's for good fucking reason, because fossil fuels kill us and green energy, by definition, it doesn't. Over the years, we have made more regulations that apply to fossil fuels than we have green energy, I think. So if we're not going to be specific about what things we're enforcing and not enforcing to streamline energy approval shit, that sounds to me like probably a net win for fossil fuels. Things not in the deal: student loan relief. The Biden administration's student debt case will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court, but the bill does require the Biden administration to follow through with a plan to end the current pause, which has been in effect since the start of the pandemic, on student loan repayments by the end of summer. So again, as I've said, I don't think this is going anywhere anyway because of the Supreme Court, but it's nice to know that they haven't killed it yet. Tax hikes. House Democrats will be fuming about this. They were already critical that the White House did not make taxes on the rich and powerful the centerpiece of their talks. Yeah. What we need to be doing, obviously, as a million things in this country indicate, is taxing the rich. That's against Joe Biden's hand jobs for corporate America. Biden is a corporate America Democrat. He is never going to champion progressive policies. He is always going to lean in the direction of conservative Republican bullshit. Finally, clean energy. Republicans had wanted to repeal key provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act's clean energy and climate provisions, but it was unscathed. A win for both, certainly as far as environmentalists are concerned. The U.S. Renewable Energy Industry Group, the American Clean Power Association, said it applauds President Joe Biden and Speaker Kevin McCarthy for prioritizing national interests over partisan politics. That one, I don't have a lot of specific details about. I guess that sounds, from the American Clean Power Association, like not the worst thing in the world, so I guess that's good. But maybe it's just because it's about 3 a.m. my time. Maybe it's just because reading about all this debt ceiling bullshit has really gotten me worked up. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this juice report because I need to fucking smoke some weed and chill out, because I am now like all fired up about what a shitty deal this is. And frankly, if I was in Congress, I would vote to fucking tank it, because fuck Joe Biden and his 2024 presidential run. I know we risk having Trump in office again and therefore forever. In the meantime, we do have Joe Biden to deal with, and I don't think we should hold his feet to the fire any less than we would otherwise. I think we shouldn't worry about 2024 until the Republicans get their primary underway and we can really start to understand the contours of the race and worry about things then. So in the meantime, that just means that this debt ceiling bullshit is a big win for Republicans because Democrats didn't fucking have to do anything. It's already in the Constitution that you have to pay the goddamn debt. And on top of that, as I said, lawmakers have way too much interest in the system to fucking blow up the world economy. They're just not going to do it. So negotiating at all on anything is automatically a win for them. And the fact that the Democrats would do that when they control 2 out of the 3 houses of legislating in the government is fucking absurd. It just shows how absolutely weak they are, that they keep letting the Republicans bring this up as a bullshit issue that shouldn't exist and doesn't exist in other modern democracies. But I've already gotten into that, so this is Drink Your OJ with another Juice Report. I hope everybody has a great fucking day. I'm going to go smoke a joint and chill the fuck out. So everyone, take care.